She's never even held a violin before, Professor Harrington whispered, setting up the perfect humiliation. The donors exchanged knowing smiles. Another charity event, another display of who belongs and who doesn't. Destiny Jones heard every word as she waited in the wings. Her calloused fingers remembered differently. 3 generations of music they'd tried to erase. Westmont Academy had rules about talent, about pedigree, about who deserves to be heard. They invited her on stage as a joke. 3 minutes later, no one was laughing. The silence after her final note lasted exactly 5 seconds. What happened next would change the school forever. Some say talent speaks for itself, but first, someone needs to hand you the microphone. Westmont Academy stood like a fortress of privilege on the hill, all Gothic spires and ivy-covered brick. Students carried leather instrument cases with family crests, legacies stretching back generations. Inside those hallowed halls, music meant pedigree as much as passion. Destiny Jones entered this world 3 weeks ago as a mid-semester transfer, scholarship papers clutched in one hand, second-hand backpack slung over her shoulder. Her first day, she navigated marble corridors where students parted around her like water around a stone-knot hostel, simply certain she didn't belong. "You must be lost," a girl with perfect posture and pearls said, not unkindly. "Visitor passes are at the front office." "I'm a student," Destiny replied, voice quiet but firm. "New transfer." The surprise that flickered across the girl's face wasn't malicious, just genuine confusion at something that didn't fit the established order. Music theory was Destiny's first class. She slipped into the back row, eyes down, drawing no attention. Professor James Harrington commanded the room from a raised platform, silver-haired and elegant in a tailored blazer. His reputation preceded him, 30 years discovering prodigies, judging international competitions, writing definitive texts, the kind of teacher who could make or break careers before they began. Bach understood mathematical precision, he lectured, fingers dancing above an invisible keyboard. His genius lay in making complex patterns feel inevitable. Who can explain the counterpoint structure in his violin partita number 2? Hands shot up, the eager, the confident, the prepared. Not Destiny's. She traced the wood grain of her desk, remembering her grandfather's voice. "Keep your light hidden until it's time to shine." Her grandfather, Marcus Jones, never had his name on album covers or concert programs. Yet for 40 years, his violin backed countless recordings' anonymous session work that put food on the table and paid for Destiny's first instrument. The symphony halls that wouldn't hire him still played music shaped by his bow. "Your greatest advantage," he'd told her, "is that they'll never see you coming." After class, Professor Harrington stopped her. "Ms. Jones, is it? Our newest addition." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you'll find ways to participate, though I understand catching up might be challenging given your background." She nodded politely. "I'll do my best, sir." "I'm sure you will." The dismissal was gentle but absolute. In the practice rooms later, Destiny listened through walls as students prepared for the upcoming charity fundraiser. The annual event brought wealthy donors, board members, and industry connections, a showcase where Westmont displayed its best and brightest. "Harrington only picks his favorites," a boy complained in the hallway. "The rest of us may as well be invisible." "Did you see the scholarship list this year?" another voice replied. "They're really pushing the diversity angle. That new girl, what's her name? Guess they needed to fill a quota." Destiny closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. Nothing she hadn't heard before. That evening, she waited until the building emptied, then slipped into the smallest practice room at the far end of the east wing. From her backpack, she carefully withdrew a violin case-worn leather patched in places, but the instrument inside maintained with religious care. Her fingers found the strings, like coming home. She played without sheet music, softly at first, then with growing confidence as the empty hallways assured her solitude. What flowed from the violin wasn't just technique. It was history, emotion, the collective memory of music passed down through her family when formal training was denied them. What Destiny heard once, she never forgot. Her grandfather had called it her gift-perfect recall, not just of notes, but of emotion, interpretation, the invisible architecture beneath the sound. She could hear a piece once and reproduce it with uncanny precision, then reshape it with her own voice. She played for 30 minutes, then carefully packed away the evidence. No one at Westmont knew what she could do, and she planned to keep it that way until she decided otherwise. The next morning, Ms. Rivera, the librarian, caught her eye. "I heard someone playing last night," she said quietly. "After hours." Destiny froze. "Whoever it was," Ms. Rivera continued, sliding a book across the counter, "might find this interesting. It has restricted access, but I can make an exception." The cover read, "Advanced Violin Technique, Historical Approaches." Sometimes talent needs protection until it's ready to be seen, Ms. Rivera said. "I knew your grandfather years ago. He played like his soul was speaking directly to yours." For the first time since arriving, Destiny felt seen. That afternoon, Professor Harrington announced the charity event program. "Our donors expect excellence," he reminded the class, "which is why we select only our most accomplished students to represent Westmont standards." His gaze swept past Destiny without pause. The quartet he selected all legacy students with pedigrees as polished as their instruments, preened at the front of the room. Their leader, Alexander Crawford, whose father chaired the board, nodded as if acknowledging his rightful place. "We'll be performing Vivaldi's Summer from the Four Seasons," Alexander announced. "Professor Harrington believes it perfectly showcases our technical abilities." Destiny's fingers twitched involuntarily. Her grandfather had played that piece differently than any recording she'd ever heard, finding something wild and untamed beneath the familiar notes. "Something amusing, Ms. Jones?" Professor Harrington asked, noticing her movement. "No, sir." She stilled her hands. "Perhaps you'd care to share your thoughts on Vivaldi, since you seem engaged?" A trap. Say nothing and appear ignorant. Say something and risk exposure. "I was just thinking about interpretation, sir," she said carefully. "How the same notes can tell different stories depending on who plays them." Alexander smirked. "That's assuming the person can play the notes at all." Professor Harrington's smile was thin. "Indeed. Theory is one thing, Ms. Jones. Execution is quite another." Little did they know whose hands had really mastered Bach's complexity. The fundraiser would need a miracle to break Westmont's rigid hierarchy, and miracles sometimes come from unexpected places. What Destiny heard once, she never forgot, and that was about to matter more than anyone knew. 3 days before the fundraiser, Professor Harrington held a special rehearsal for the quartet. The auditorium's empty seats seemed to watch with the critical eyes of future donors as Alexander and his group arranged themselves on stage, instruments gleaming under practice lights. "From the Allegro, please," Harrington directed from the front row. "And remember, this isn't merely about technical accuracy. These donors appreciate the difference between competent playing and true musicianship." Destiny sat in the back corner, ostensibly studying music theory but actually observing. Professor Harrington had suggested that scholarship students attend these rehearsals to learn from their more accomplished peers, he'd said. The subtext was clear: know your place in the hierarchy. The quartet began Vivaldi's Summer with technical precision. Notes executed perfectly, timing impeccable. Yet something was missing. The storm at the heart of the piece, the tension between chaos and control that made Vivaldi revolutionary felt sanitized, academic. Destiny closed her eyes, remembering her grandfather playing this same passage. how his bow had attacked the strings during the storm section, making the instrument growl and sing simultaneously. How he'd described summer storms in Virginia where he'd grown up violent, cleansing, necessary. Without realizing it, she began to hum softly, fingers marking phantom strings against her leg. The quartet faltered at a particularly difficult transition. Alexander's frustration was visible as Professor Harrington stopped them. "The 16th note passage needs more urgency," Harrington instructed. "You're playing it too cautiously." "We're trying to maintain precision," Alexander defended. "Precision without passion is just mathematics," Destiny murmured, too quietly for anyone to hear. Or so she thought. "Do you have something to contribute, Ms. Jones?" Professor Harrington's voice cut across the auditorium. The room went silent. Every head turned toward her. "No, sir. I apologize for the interruption." "No, please." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Since you feel compelled to comment during rehearsal, you must have insights worth sharing. A trap was being laid, but there was no path around it. I just thought—" Destiny chose her words carefully. "The storm section could use more contrast, more turbulence before the resolution." Alexander's laugh was sharp. "And you're an expert on Baroque performance now?" "I didn't claim to be," she replied evenly. Professor Harrington's head tilted slightly, his interest seemingly piqued, though not in a way that felt safe. "Fascinating. Perhaps Ms. Jones believes she could demonstrate a more appropriate interpretation." More laughter rippled through the room. The quartet exchanged amused glances. "I was only making an observation," Destiny said, gathering her books. "I shouldn't have spoken out of turn." No. Professor Harrington's voice carried theatrical generosity. "I insist. We're always looking for diverse perspectives. In fact, I think this presents an excellent opportunity." He turned to address the whole room. "Our fundraiser aims to showcase Westmont's commitment to developing all types of talent. Perhaps we should include Ms. Jones in the program." The suggestion hung in the air like a carefully crafted insult disguised as an opportunity. No one misunderstood the intent. It was meant as humiliation, not inclusion. "I don't think that's necessary," Destiny said, her throat tight. "I disagree." Professor Harrington's smile widened. "I think our donors would appreciate seeing the breadth of our student body, a contrast to our more seasoned performers." Alexander didn't bother hiding his smirk. "Absolutely. Everyone deserves their moment in the spotlight." The trap had sprung. Refuse and confirm their belief in her inadequacy. Accept and face public humiliation when she failed to meet Westmont's exacting standards. But they didn't know what she carried inside her 3 generations of music denied recognition. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "There will come a moment when hiding your light no longer serves you. When that moment comes, don't just shine blind them." "What piece should I prepare?" Destiny asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Professor Harrington waved dismissively. "Oh, something simple. Perhaps a basic etude? We wouldn't want to set you up for failure." "Or," Alexander suggested with mock helpfulness, "she could try Paganini's Caprice No. 24, since she's offering critique on our Vivaldi." More laughter. Paganini's 24th Caprice was notoriously one of the most difficult solo violin pieces ever composed, a test piece for virtuosos. "An excellent suggestion," Professor Harrington agreed, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Though perhaps a bit ambitious. Ms. Jones, you're welcome to choose something within your capabilities." The challenge was clear, the mockery undisguised. Destiny met his gaze directly for the first time. "Paganini's 24th would be fine." A brief flicker of surprise crossed Harrington's face before his confident smile returned. "Well, this should be educational for everyone. You'll perform after the quartet on Saturday evening." As Destiny left the auditorium, she heard the laughter resume behind her. Alexander's voice carried, "This will certainly be memorable for the donors." What no one realized, she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. The charity event was 3 days away. Destiny had work to do. Dawn found Destiny in the East Wing practice room, violin already warm in her hands. Sleep had been impossible with Paganini's variations spinning through her mind. 24 hours after accepting the challenge, doubt had begun its insidious whisper. The 24th caprice wasn't just difficult. It was a gauntlet thrown at the limitations of the instrument itself. Virtuosos spent years mastering its punishing technical demands. The double stops, the lightning-fast arpeggios, the stratospheric harmonics. Even with her gift for recall and her grandfather's training, 3 days of preparation seemed impossible. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Everything okay? You were quiet last night." Destiny responded with reassurance, saying nothing about Saturday's performance. Her family had sacrificed too much for this scholarship. The last thing they needed was worry about another instance of Destiny being put in her place. She began her practice with scales, letting muscle memory calm her nerves. Then the first theme of the caprice, those declarative opening notes that announced the player's intent to conquer mountains. Her fingers found the patterns, but the sound wasn't right. Technical accuracy wasn't enough. Paganini demanded fire. The practice room door opened without warning. Ms. Rivera stood in the doorway, a coffee cup in each hand. "I thought you might be here," the librarian said, offering one of the cups. "Sounds like you've taken on a challenge." Destiny lowered her violin. "How did you know?" "News travels fast in small kingdoms." Ms. Rivera closed the door behind her. "Paganini's 24th is an interesting choice for someone trying to stay unnoticed. It wasn't exactly my choice. I suspected as much." Ms. Rivera leaned against the piano. "Your grandfather played it once, you know, at a competition in Chicago, 1978. The judges couldn't believe what they were hearing. He never told me that story." "He wouldn't have. They gave the prize to someone else, someone with the right connections, the right background. After that, he stopped competing and started studio work." Destiny's fingers tightened around her violin. "Then maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I should just play something simple, get through it, stay invisible." "That's one option." Ms. Rivera sipped her coffee. "Or you could finish what he started." The weight of those words settled between them. "I have recordings," Ms. Rivera continued, "from various competitions, including your grandfather's performance. The library's audio archive is quite extensive, if you're interested." After Ms. Rivera left, Destiny practiced until her fingers ached, then made her way to the library's audio room. The recordings weren't just of Paganini. Ms. Rivera had assembled a collection of revolutionary performances across decades, including bootleg recordings of her grandfather that Destiny had never heard. His approach to Paganini was unlike anything in the standard interpretations where others showcased technical brilliance. Marcus Jones had found the rebellious heart of the composer, the radical spirit that had made him both celebrated and controversial in his time. In the afternoon theory class, Professor Harrington announced the updated program for the fundraiser. "We'll begin with our student quartet performing Vivaldi, followed by a brief intermission, and then—" His pause was perfectly timed for maximum effect. "A special addition to our program. Ms. Jones will be presenting Paganini's Caprice No. 24. Murmurs and poorly concealed laughter rippled through the classroom. Alexander turned to catch Destiny's eye, his expression a mix of amusement and pity. "An ambitious choice," Professor Harrington continued, "especially for someone without formal conservatory training. But Westmont believes in stretching our students' capabilities." The mockery was thinly veiled, the expectation of failure palpable. Several students glanced at their phones, no doubt spreading word of the upcoming spectacle. "This should be interesting," a girl whispered 2 seats away. "Has anyone even heard her play?" "Harrington says she doesn't have proper technique," came the whispered response. This is going to be a train wreck. Destiny stared straight ahead, face composed. Let them talk. Let them expect disaster. The element of surprise remained her greatest advantage. That evening, she found a note slipped into her practice room. They're recording tomorrow's rehearsal to share. Be careful. R. The warning was clear. They were planning to capture her struggles during the final rehearsal, to circulate her failure before the actual performance. The cruelty was as sophisticated as it was efficient. Destiny made a decision. She wouldn't attend tomorrow's rehearsal. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. She would save her true playing for when it mattered most. Instead, she spent the next day in a public library miles from campus, headphones on, fingers moving through Paganini's variations without an instrument. Mental practice, her grandfather had called it. Sometimes more valuable than physical repetition. When she returned to campus that evening, rumors had already begun circulating. Her absence had been noted, interpreted as fear, as admission of inadequacy. Alexander had apparently mimicked her anticipated performance during rehearsal, deliberately playing with exaggerated mistakes to uproarious laughter. The night before the fundraiser, doubt returned with reinforcements. Destiny lay awake, staring at her ceiling, her grandfather's violin in its case beside her bed. What if she failed? What if the pressure overwhelmed her gift? What if her hands betrayed her at the crucial moment? Her phone lit up with a text from her mother. Your grandfather always said music isn't about proving something to others. It's about saying something true. The reminder centered her. This wasn't about Westmont or Professor Harrington or even proving her worth. It was about honoring the music itself and those who had passed it to her. Saturday evening arrived with crisp autumn air and a parade of luxury vehicles depositing donors at Westmont's grand entrance. The recital hall glowed with tasteful lighting, programs printed on heavy cardstock, champagne flowing freely during the pre-performance reception. Destiny watched from the shadows of the practice area as Professor Harrington moved through the crowd, charming potential donors with practiced ease. She caught fragments of his conversations, mentions of talented legacy students, the prestigious conservatories Westmont graduates attended, the exclusive community they were maintaining. Alexander and his quartet prepared in the green room, instruments tuned to perfection, confidence radiating from their expensive formal wear and easy smiles. They had done this many times before. This was their world. Destiny wore the only formal outfit she owned, a simple black dress, modest and functional. Her grandfather's violin waited in its case, the wood warm and responsive when she removed it for final tuning. The instrument knew what was coming. It had been waiting just as she had. Professor Harrington found her 10 minutes before the performance began. Ah, Ms. Jones, you decided to join us after all. His smile was thin. After yesterday's absence, we weren't certain you would appear. I wouldn't miss it, Destiny replied simply. Indeed. He studied her and the old violin with barely concealed disdain. Just remember, there's no shame in simplifying the piece if it proves too challenging. Our donors appreciate honesty about one's limitations. Before she could respond, he was called away to welcome a particularly important patron. Left alone, Destiny closed her eyes and breathed deeply, centering herself in the moment. The quartet performed beautifully. Their Vivaldi was technically flawless, exactly as rehearsed. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, particularly from the front rows where board members and major donors sat. Then came the intermission. 15 minutes of nervous anticipation as Destiny prepared to take the stage. Through the curtain, she could hear Professor Harrington addressing the audience. And now, for something a bit different, he announced, his tone suggesting an amusing diversion rather than a serious performance. As part of Westmont's commitment to developing talent from all backgrounds, we have a special addition to our program. Please welcome one of our newest scholarship students, Destiny Jones, attempting Paganini's Caprice No. 24. The word attempting hung in the air, setting expectations deliberately low. The applause was polite but reserved as Destiny walked to center stage, violin in hand. Under the bright lights, she saw Alexander and his friends in the wings, phones discreetly positioned to capture what they expected to be a humiliating failure. Professor Harrington sat in the front row beside the board chairman, a thin smile of anticipation on his face. In that moment, Destiny made a final decision. She wouldn't just play Paganini's notes. She would play her grandfather's interpretation, the one that had been denied recognition decades ago. The one that saw past technical showmanship to the revolutionary spirit beneath. As she raised her violin to her shoulder, the audience settled into expectant silence. The donors had no idea they were about to witness history being made. As she positioned her bow above the strings, only she knew what was about to happen. The moment she touched bow to string, everything would change. The first note changed everything. A single, authoritative G, not tentative, or cautious as they'd expected from a student attempting something beyond her reach, but commanding, rich with overtones that resonated throughout the hall. Destiny's bow connected with the string as if they'd been made for each other, producing a sound that immediately silenced the whispering and shifting in the audience. Professor Harrington's smug expression flickered. This wasn't the hesitant beginning he'd anticipated. Destiny launched into Paganini's theme with such clarity and precision that several audience members leaned forward in their seats. Her left hand navigated the fingerboard with fluid confidence, finding each note with unerring accuracy. But technical precision was just the foundation. What captured attention was the character in her playing, the personality emerging from the instrument. Alexander, watching from the wings, lowered his phone slightly. This wasn't the embarrassment he'd come to record. The first variation arrived, and Destiny's bow danced across the strings in perfectly articulated 16th notes, each one distinct yet flowing into a seamless musical line. Her right arm moved with a relaxed efficiency that belied the difficulty of what she was accomplishing. In the front row, a distinguished older man with silver hair, the visiting conductor from the State Symphony, removed his glasses and leaned forward, his expression shifting from polite attention to focused interest. The second variation brought double stops, 2 strings played simultaneously, requiring perfect intonation and bow control. Destiny executed them with a singing quality that made the technically challenging passage seem natural, inevitable. This wasn't mere reproduction of notes, this was interpretation. A murmur rippled through the audience. The contrast between expectations and reality was becoming impossible to ignore. By the third variation, with its rapid string crossings, Professor Harrington's smile had disappeared entirely. His eyes narrowed as he watched Destiny's fingers fly across the fingerboard, her technique revealing years of disciplined practice that he had assumed she didn't possess. The fourth variation's arpeggios cascaded like water, flowing from her instrument with a liquid clarity that professional violinists struggled to achieve. Each note rang true, the musical line never broken despite the technical demands. In the fifth variation, Destiny began to reveal her grandfather's influence more distinctly, his uniquely American interpretation of the Italian master, finding blues inflections and jazz-like phrasings within the classical framework. It was subtle enough to honor the original, bold enough to make listeners hear the familiar piece with fresh ears. No student had ever attempted this piece at Westmont before. Certainly not like this. As she moved into the more demanding variations, Destiny's body swayed slightly with the music, completely absorbed in the conversation between composer and performer across centuries. Her face reflected the emotional landscape of the piece, determination in the assertive passages, tranquility in the lyrical moments, fierce concentration during the most technically demanding sections. The audience had gone completely still. No coughing, no program rustling, no whispered comments, just rapt attention. In the 10th variation, with its notorious octave jumps, Destiny's left hand moved with such precision that the difficult leaps seemed effortless. The clean, perfectly tuned octaves rang through the hall like bell tones. Alexander had stopped recording entirely, his phone forgotten at his side. His expression mixed disbelief with a growing, reluctant respect. When Destiny reached the 13th variation, a passage of artificial harmonics that created ethereal, whistle-like tones, several audience members actually gasped. The delicate, gossamer sound floated above the hall like something otherworldly, perfectly controlled yet seemingly impossible. Professor Harrington's face had paled. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat as the performance continued to dismantle every assumption he'd made about the young woman on stage. The most technically challenging variations, 16 through 20, showcased a virtuosity that couldn't be faked or rushed into existence. This was the product of thousands of hours of practice, of techniques passed down and refined through generations. Destiny's grandfather's voice seemed to speak through her fingers, his denied recognition finally finding expression. In the audience, the visiting conductor had taken out a small notebook and was writing rapidly, glancing up frequently to study Destiny's technique. As she approached the final variations, Destiny closed her eyes, trusting her fingers to find their way through the musical landscape she knew by heart. This wasn't showing off. It was surrendering completely to the music, allowing it to speak through her without interference. The 24th variation brought everything together. All the technical elements combined with the emotional architecture of the piece. Destiny's bow flew across the strings, her left hand a blur of precise motion. The tempo pushed forward with an urgency that created palpable tension in the hall, driving toward the piece's conclusion with inevitable momentum. Then came the coda Paganini's final statement. Destiny's interpretation found both the humor and the triumph in these closing measures, the composer's wink at having taken performer and listener on such a challenging journey. Her bow bit into the strings for the final chords, each one perfectly balanced and resonant. The last note hung in the air, a perfectly tuned D that seemed to expand to fill the entire hall before fading into absolute silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. Professor Harrington couldn't deny what was happening. The evidence was irrefutable. Destiny Jones possessed not just technical mastery, but artistic maturity far beyond what should have been possible for a student her age, especially one without the advantages Westmont normally required. The silence stretched 1 second longer, a held breath between revelation and acknowledgement. Then the visiting conductor stood, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The gesture broke the spell, and the audience erupted into thunderous applause that seemed to physically push Destiny back a step. Faces that had prepared for amusement now showed astonishment, admiration, even awe. The wealthy donors who had expected a token diversity performance were on their feet, responding to excellence they recognized regardless of its source. Alexander stood frozen in the wings. His planned mockery evaporated in the face of undeniable talent. His quartet members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Their earlier ridicule transformed into something like shame. Destiny lowered her violin, momentarily overwhelmed by the response. She hadn't played for the applause, she'd played for the truth of the music, for her grandfather's legacy, for everyone who'd been told their voice didn't belong in spaces like this. But the response mattered. The recognition mattered. Not for her ego, but as correction to an imbalanced talent finally acknowledged on its own terms. As the applause continued, Professor Harrington remained seated, his worldview visibly reorganizing itself behind his eyes. His carefully constructed hierarchy had just been fundamentally challenged, not by arguments or politics, but by excellence impossible to dismiss. The board chairman leaned over to say something in his ear, gesturing toward the stage with obvious approval. Harrington nodded stiffly, his expression complicated. In that moment, Destiny's gaze met Ms. Rivera's at the back of the hall. The librarian's smile carried decades of waiting for exactly this kind of moment, when talent refused to be defined by anything but its own brilliance. The applause showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, it was growing stronger as the initial shock gave way to genuine appreciation. These were people who attended professional concerts regularly. They knew what they were hearing. Destiny took a small bow, overwhelmed but composed. As she straightened, she saw the visiting conductor making his way toward the stage, program in hand, clearly intending to speak with her. Whatever happened next would be unlike anything Westmont Academy had planned for this evening. The carefully maintained order had been disrupted not by protest or policy, but by pure, undeniable excellence. And excellence, once revealed, cannot be unseen. The applause continued as the visiting conductor approached the stage, taking the steps with purpose. Silver-haired and distinguished in his tuxedo, Maestro Robert Chen carried the gravitas of someone who had spent decades at the pinnacle of classical music. When he extended his hand to Destiny, the gesture carried unmistakable respect. "Extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying to the front rows. "Truly extraordinary." Destiny shook his hand, still holding her violin in her left. "Thank you, sir." The audience gradually quieted, sensing a significant moment unfolding. Professor Harrington rose from his seat with visible reluctance, climbing the stairs to join them on stage. His carefully constructed smile couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "A surprising performance," he acknowledged, positioning himself between Destiny and the conductor. "Ms. Jones has certainly exceeded expectations." Maestro Chen turned to him with a pointed look. "Exceeded expectations? James, that was one of the finest interpretations of Paganini's 24th I've heard from someone under 30. Conservatory level doesn't begin to describe it." Professor Harrington's smile tightened. "Indeed. A hidden talent we're just discovering ourselves governing." "Who is your teacher?" Maestro Chen asked Destiny directly, ignoring Harrington's attempt to mediate the conversation. Before she could answer, Professor Harrington interjected. "Ms. Jones is new to our program. We haven't had much opportunity to assess her training, which appears to have been unconventional." Destiny looked directly at Professor Harrington for the first time that evening. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer a student to be dismissed. "My grandfather taught me," she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the hall. "Marcus Jones." The name hung in the air. Professor Harrington showed no recognition, but Maestro Chen's eyes widened slightly. "Marcus Jones," he repeated. "The session violinist?" "You knew him?" Destiny asked, surprise breaking through her composure. "Knew of him," Chen corrected. "His playing appears on dozens of important recordings from the 60s through the 90s, though rarely credited. He had a distinctive approach to phrasing I recognized in your performance tonight." He turned to Harrington. "You didn't make the connection." Professor Harrington's expression flickered between confusion and discomfort. Ms. Jones's background wasn't fully detailed in her transfer paperwork. "Or perhaps not fully read," Maestro Chen suggested dryly. From the front row, the board chairman stood. "Perhaps we could continue this fascinating discussion at the reception? Our donors are eager to meet tonight's performers." The suggestion carried the weight of instruction. Professor Harrington nodded stiffly, gesturing toward the wings. But as Destiny moved to exit, Maestro Chen placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "One moment," he said, then turned to address the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you recognize the privilege we've shared tonight. What we've witnessed isn't just technical mastery, but musical interpretation of remarkable maturity." The audience murmured agreement, many still standing. "I've conducted orchestras for 35 years, Chen continued, and I recognize when I'm hearing a unique voice. Ms. Jones's grandfather, Marcus Jones, was denied opportunities despite extraordinary talent. The musical world is poorer for it." Professor Harrington shifted uncomfortably beside them. His carefully orchestrated humiliation had transformed into a moment that threatened his authority, his judgment, his position as arbiter of talent. "I believe," Chen said, turning slightly toward Harrington, "that true musical education isn't about preserving traditions of exclusion, but about recognizing excellence wherever it appears." The pointed comment landed precisely. Several board members exchanged glances. "Not every musician needs your permission to be great," Chen added, his voice quiet but carrying. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. What followed would change everything. Applause erupted again, more enthusiastic than before. The audience wasn't just acknowledging a performance now, they were endorsing a correction, a recognition of what had been overlooked. As they moved toward the reception area, Alexander and his quartet approached. The mockery had vanished from his expression, replaced by something more complex: embarrassment, respect, recalculation. "That was," he began, searching for words. "I've never heard it played like that. Where did you learn that interpretation?" Destiny regarded him steadily. "From someone who wasn't allowed on stages like this one." Alexander nodded, understanding dawning in his expression. "I'd like to hear more about that sometime, if you're willing." In the reception hall, the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. Donors who would normally have clustered around Professor Harrington and his selected students instead gravitated toward Destiny. Questions flowed about her training, her technique, her musical influences. Professor Harrington attempted to insert himself into these conversations, to reclaim his role as intermediary between students and the musical establishment. But each time, Maestro Chen gently redirected the focus back to Destiny herself. "James," Chen finally said, drawing Harrington aside, "we need to discuss something important." They moved to a quiet corner of the reception. Though their conversation remained private, their body language told the story, Chen speaking with measured intensity, Harrington's posture gradually shifting from defensive to resigned. Across the room, the board chairman observed everything with calculating eyes. When Professor Harrington approached Destiny again, his demeanor had changed entirely. Gone was the condescension, the dismissive confidence. In its place was a careful formality that acknowledged the new reality. "Ms. Jones," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "it appears I've made some incorrect assumptions about your background and training." The room quieted as people sensed another significant moment. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a public reckoning. "Your performance tonight demonstrated exceptional talent," Harrington continued. "Talent that I failed to recognize or encourage." The admission clearly cost him, each word carefully measured. "Westmont Academy prides itself on musical excellence," he said, glancing toward the board chairman. "Excellence that should be recognized regardless of preconceptions." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a formal yielding of ground that everyone present understood. "Thank you, Professor," Destiny replied, neither gloating nor diminishing the moment. "I look forward to contributing to Westmont's musical community." The subtle emphasis on contributing, rather than learning from, established her position not as a grateful recipient of opportunity, but as an equal participant with something valuable to offer. The conductor's next words would rewrite Westmont's history. "Ms. Jones," Maestro Chen said, joining them with the board chairman at his side, "we've been discussing an appropriate recognition of your extraordinary talent." Destiny waited, aware that every eye in the room was on them. "The State Symphony has a youth conductor program," Chen continued. "Selected students work directly with our orchestra to develop leadership skills alongside musical excellence." He smiled. "We'd like you to join us as student conductor for next season's showcase." The offer was unprecedented direct entry into a program usually reserved for graduate-level conservatory students. More than recognition, it was a path forward, a platform. "Additionally," the board chairman added, clearly following Chen's lead, "we believe Westmont would benefit from a more diverse approach to musical education. We'd like to discuss establishing a mentorship program for talented students from underserved schools with you as a founding participant." Professor Harrington's expression remained carefully neutral, but the shift in power was undeniable. His judgment had been overruled not through conflict, but through excellence that could not be denied. "I'd be honored," Destiny said simply. As conversations resumed around them, Ms. Rivera approached with a small, knowing smile. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said quietly. "Not just of your playing, but of how you carried yourself." "I wish he could have been here," Destiny replied. "He was," Ms. Rivera assured her, "in every note." Across the room, Alexander and his quartet watched with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning respect. The hierarchy they'd taken for granted had been fundamentally altered, not demolished, but recalibrated to make room for merit that couldn't be denied. Talent doesn't ask permission to exist. The truth of that statement resonated throughout the reception hall as the evening continued, a truth demonstrated not through argument, but through undeniable excellence that had changed Westmont Academy forever. The reception continued for another hour, but everything had changed. Where Destiny had previously navigated Westmont's halls as a ghost present but unseen, she now moved through the crowd as its center, receiving congratulations and questions with quiet grace. Professor Harrington maintained his professional composure, though the strain showed in the tightness around his eyes. Each time a donor or board member praised Destiny's performance, he nodded with mechanical agreement, his authority visibly receding with each acknowledgement. "You must perform with us at the Winter Showcase," insisted Mrs. Whitford, whose family name adorned the East Wing practice rooms. "My husband and I host a pre-concert dinner for our featured musicians. We'd be delighted to include you." "Thank you," Destiny replied, still adjusting to this new reality where her presence was sought rather than tolerated. "That's very kind." Alexander approached again, this time without his usual entourage. His confidence had recalibrated, humility tempering his privileged ease. "I owe you an apology," he said, direct and unexpectedly sincere. "What I said in rehearsal, it was cruel and unfounded." Destiny studied him for a moment. "Why did you suggest Paganini's 24th? He hesitated, then admitted, "Because I thought it would be impossible for you. I wanted to—" He didn't finish the sentence. "To watch me fail," she completed for him. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I was wrong. Not just about your playing, but about why it matters." In another corner, Maestro Chen was engaged in serious conversation with the board chairman and several key donors. Their glances toward Destiny made it clear she was the subject of their discussion. Ms. Rivera appeared at Destiny's side with a glass of water. "Pace yourself," she advised quietly. "This is just the beginning." "Of what?" "Of a significant correction." The librarian's smile held decades of patient waiting. Excellence has a way of demanding recognition, eventually. As the crowd began to thin, Professor Harrington made one final approach. His expression had settled into something more genuine, the calculation replaced by a more complex recognition. "Ms. Jones," he began, then paused to recalibrate. "Destiny, I owe you a more substantive acknowledgement than I offered earlier." She waited, neither helping nor hindering his effort. "I made assumptions about your background, your training, your potential." Each word seemed carefully chosen. "Those assumptions were incorrect and unfair." "They were," she agreed simply. He nodded, accepting the directness. "Your performance tonight was exceptional by any standard. I failed in my responsibility as an educator by not recognizing your talent sooner. It wasn't quite 'I'm sorry,' but it was an admission of error from a man unaccustomed to being wrong." "What happens now?" Destiny asked. "Now," he said with a slight smile that held a hint of genuine respect, "we adjust our approach. Your inclusion in the student conductor program will require schedule modifications. And this mentorship initiative the board is suddenly enthusiastic about will need faculty oversight. The implication was clear. He was positioning himself to remain relevant in the new paradigm, adapting rather than resisting. "I look forward to working together," Destiny said, neither embracing nor rejecting his attempt at reconciliation. As the last guests departed, Destiny found herself alone in the recital hall, her grandfather's violin still in its case on the chair beside her. The space felt different now, no longer intimidating but not yet comfortable. A negotiated territory. She opened the case and ran her fingers lightly over the instrument's curves. This violin had been her grandfather's voice when the world refused to hear him directly. Tonight, it had spoken for both of them. The door opened quietly, and Maestro Chen entered. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the seat beside her. When she nodded, he sat, regarding the violin with appreciation. "Remarkable instrument. 19th century?" "Early 20th," she corrected. "Nothing special in terms of pedigree, but it was his." "Instruments carry histories," Chen observed. "This one has been part of something important tonight." "Will it really change anything?" Destiny asked, the question emerging from a place of honesty. "One performance, one night, one—" "Change isn't usually a single moment," Chen replied thoughtfully. "It's a crack in a structure that allows light to enter. What happens next depends on many factors, but the crack remains." He studied her with professional assessment. "You have extraordinary gifts, Ms. Jones. Technical ability, interpretive maturity, and something rarer, the courage to speak musical truth regardless of consequence. My grandfather always said that was the only reason to play at all." A wise man. Chen stood, straightening his tuxedo jacket. "The coming weeks will bring adjustment. Professor Harrington and others will recalibrate their understanding of you, of themselves, of this institution. Some will embrace the change. Others will resist it. And you? I'll be watching with great interest." His smile held genuine warmth. "The symphony begins rehearsals for the spring showcase in January. We'll be in touch before then to discuss your role as student conductor." After he left, Destiny remained seated, processing the evening's transformation. Her phone vibrated with messages from her mother, asking how the performance had gone. How could she possibly explain the seismic shift that had occurred? That would require a longer conversation, one best had in person. As she finally gathered her things to leave, Alexander appeared in the doorway. He'd changed from his performance attire into more casual clothes, but his expression remained thoughtful. "Our quartet rehearses on Tuesday evenings," he said without preamble. "If you're interested, we could use a fresh perspective on the Schubert we're starting." The invitation represented something significant. Not friendship exactly, but recognition. A place at the table previously denied. "I'll think about it," Destiny replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the overture. He nodded, understanding the boundary. "Your grandfather, was he really never credited for his work?" "He was credited on exactly 3 albums out of hundreds," Destiny said. "He used to say music was more important than names, but—" "But names determine who gets heard," Alexander finished, insight flickering across his features. "I never had to think about that." "No," she agreed. "You didn't." As she left the building, violin case secure in her hand, Destiny felt a curious lightness. One performance hadn't erased the barriers, healed the wounds, or transformed the institution. But the music department would never be the same, and that was exactly the point. Her grandfather's legacy would continue, just not in the way anyone expected. 3 weeks later, Destiny sat in Westmont's main practice room, not the small, hidden space in the East Wing, but the premier room with perfect acoustics and a Steinway grand piano. Access to this room had previously been an unspoken privilege reserved for select students. Now she had a scheduled time slot twice weekly, her name printed on the formal schedule outside the door. She was working through a Bach partita, exploring alternative fingerings for a particularly challenging passage, when a knock interrupted her concentration. Professor Harrington stood in the doorway, a folder tucked under his arm. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his tone professional but without the condescension that had previously characterized their interactions. "Of course." Destiny lowered her violin. He entered, placing the folder on the piano bench. "The board has approved the mentorship program. We'll begin accepting applications from local public schools next month." This wasn't just administrative information. It was confirmation that her moral victory had materialized into structural change. "They've asked that you help review the applications," Harrington continued, "given your unique perspective." The slight hesitation revealed ongoing adjustment rather than lingering resistance. Progress, if imperfect. "I'd be happy to," Destiny replied. Harrington nodded, then appeared to wrestle with something unspoken. Finally, he said, "I've been teaching at Westmont for 27 years. In that time, certain patterns of thinking became fixed." Destiny waited, allowing him space to find his words. "Your performance challenged those patterns," he admitted. "It's not comfortable, but it is educational." Coming from him, this constituted significant acknowledgement. "My grandfather used to say that music exists partly to disrupt our certainties," Destiny offered, extending a conversational bridge. A small smile crossed Harrington's face. "A philosophical perspective I hadn't associated with session musicians." "Perhaps that's part of the pattern," she suggested gently. He acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Indeed." He gestured to the folder. "The program documents include funding for weekly masterclasses. Maestro Chen has agreed to conduct the first series, but we'll need additional instructors." The implication hung in the air, another recognition of her capacity, another door opening. "I'd need to balance it with the student conductor responsibilities," Destiny said, neither jumping at the opportunity nor dismissing it. "Of course, we can discuss scheduling details later." Harrington moved toward the door, then paused. "Your interpretation of the Paganini, it wasn't just technical brilliance. There was something distinctly American in the phrasing, almost like jazz influences," Destiny completed. "My grandfather played with jazz musicians in the 60s before moving to studio work. He saw connections between traditions that others kept separate." Understanding flickered across Harrington's face. "I'd be interested to hear more about that approach sometime." After he left, Destiny returned to Bach, but her thoughts remained on the conversation. The change in Harrington wasn't complete transformation. People rarely changed so thoroughly. But it was genuine evolution, institutional authority bending toward recognition of worth, previously denied. That afternoon, Destiny visited the administrative office to complete paperwork for the student conductor program. The secretary, who had barely acknowledged her existence a month ago, now greeted her by name with a warm smile. "The forms are ready for you, Ms. Jones, and Maestro Chen called again this morning. He'd like you to select the piece you'll conduct for your debut." Small changes, significant meaning. As she filled out the forms, Alexander appeared in the doorway with his quartet members. Their awkward smiles suggested an attempt at bridge building. "We're heading to Riverside Park for an impromptu practice session," he said. "Something about playing outdoors changes the sound. Would you like to join us?" The invitation represented another form of recognition, not charity or obligation, but genuine inclusion. "I have about an hour before my next class," Destiny replied, accepting the overture with measured openness. The walk to the park carried its own significance, moving together through campus as peers rather than as separate categories of belonging. Their conversation touched on interpretations of Vivaldi, the challenges of string quartet dynamics, the upcoming winter showcase. Normal student concerns now shared across previous boundaries. At the park, they found a quiet spot beneath old oak trees. As they unpacked instruments, a young girl of about 12 approached with her mother, watching with obvious fascination. "Are you going to play?" the girl asked, eyes wide. Just practicing, Alexander explained with unexpected gentleness. Do you play an instrument? The girl shook her head. My school doesn't have a music program anymore, budget cuts. Destiny and Alexander exchanged glances, unspoken understanding passing between them. This was exactly the gap the mentorship program aimed to address. Would you like to try? Destiny asked, offering her violin. The girl's mother began to protest. It looks expensive. She might damage it. But Destiny shook her head. Instruments are made to be played, she said, helping position the violin under the girl's chin. Just draw the bow across the strings. Don't worry about making mistakes. The sound that emerged was raw and unformed, but the girl's face lit with unmistakable joy. I made music, she exclaimed. Yes, you did, Destiny confirmed, catching Alexander's thoughtful expression. Later, as they packed up their instruments, Alexander said quietly, That's what the mentorship program is really about, isn't it? Not just finding undiscovered talent, but creating access. When one door opens, bring others through with you, Destiny replied. The following week brought her first official meeting as program consultant. Seated at the conference table with board members, donors, and faculty, Destiny presented her vision for the mentorship initiative. We're calling it the recognition program, she explained, because it's not about bestowing opportunity, but recognizing potential that already exists. Mrs. Whitford, now the program's primary donor, nodded approvingly. And you'll help select the first participants? Along with a committee, Destiny confirmed. We're looking for passion and potential, not just technical proficiency. Many of these students haven't had access to formal training. Professor Harrington, seated across the table, added, which will require adjusting our traditional assessment metrics. The statement, coming from him, carried particular weight. After the meeting, Ms. Rivera waited in the hallway, a knowing smile on her face. Your grandfather would be proud, she said. Not just of your playing, but of what you're building. I wish he could see it, Destiny admitted. He does, in a way, Ms. Rivera replied. Through the students who will benefit. Through the doors that will stay open after you move on. That evening, Destiny visited her family for dinner, bringing her grandfather's violin home for the first time since the performance. Her mother embraced her at the door, pride evident in her eyes. Tell me everything again, she insisted as they sat in the living room. I want to hear about Maestro Chen and the student conductor position. As Destiny recounted the details, her younger brother listened with newfound respect. Does this mean you're famous now? He asked. Hardly, she laughed, but it means something has changed. Later, in the quiet of her childhood bedroom, Destiny opened her grandfather's violin case and removed a faded photograph tucked into the lid. Marcus Jones in his 20s, violin in hand, standing outside a recording studio. His expression held the quiet dignity of someone who knew his worth regardless of external validation. She propped the photo against the lamp and began to play softly. Not Paganini or Bach, but a simple folk melody he had taught her first. The music filled the small room with memories and possibilities, connecting past recognition denied to future opportunities created. 3 days later, Destiny stood in Westmont's main auditorium, watching as a group of middle school students entered wide-eyed for their first tour of the facilities. The pilot phase of the recognition program had begun, bringing 20 students from underserved schools for weekly instruction. A girl at the back of the group caught her attention, hanging slightly behind the others, taking everything in with quiet intensity rather than open excitement. Something in her reserved observation reminded Destiny of herself. Have you played violin before? Destiny asked, approaching her. The girl shook her head. No, but I've always wanted to. My grandmother used to play. The parallel wasn't lost on Destiny. What's your name? Zora, the girl replied. Well, Zora, would you like to try? Destiny offered her violin, the same instrument that had changed the course of her own future weeks earlier. As the girl carefully positioned the violin under her chin, following Destiny's gentle guidance, the circle seemed to complete itself. Not an ending, but a continuation, talent recognized becoming talent shared. Doors opened, remaining open for others to follow. The music department would never return to what it had been before, its understanding of excellence permanently expanded, its boundaries more permeable. Not perfect, not complete, but meaningfully changed. When Zora drew the bow across the strings, producing a hesitant but clear first note, Destiny recognized the beginning of another story, one connected to her own, but taking its own unique path. This was the true moral reward, not just personal recognition, but the creation of new possibilities. The chance for talent to be seen on its own terms, to speak its truth without permission or apology. Talent doesn't ask permission to exist, but it flourishes when given the space to be heard. Enjoyed this tale of musical justice? Hit that like button to help more readers discover these stories of triumph against the odds. For more captivating narratives that deliver that perfect satisfaction of seeing talent recognized and respect earned, subscribe to Beat Stories. Every week, we bring you carefully crafted tales that make your commute, workout, or quiet evening more meaningful.